beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Brooke Thomas. On this show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path. And what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We'll be attempting to sort that out for ourselves here on the show, and we're so glad you're listening in. In today's episode, we're talking about teachers, sanghas, and gurus behaving badly. Classically, in many spiritual traditions, you'd begin your journey by following a specific teacher. But does that apply to modern times? In response to many of your questions about how to find a path and or a teacher, we're discussing how we got started on our way, whether people need to commit to a teacher or a path, how we personally found our mentors, and of course, some of the pitfalls you should look out for along the way. If you're enjoying the show, we'd be totally delighted if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com now and subscribe to hear updates on any upcoming events we might have coming up, which I swear, sooner rather than later, they're coming your way. One last note before we head into the conversation. If you're new to the podcast, Brooke and I have potty mouths, so if there are kids around, you may want to pop in some headphones. Okay, everyone, here we go.
Hey, Vanessa.
Hi, darling.
We have been getting a variety of different questions, social media, by email, comments here and there that are all pointing to a similar thing. So I'm going to try and summarize them all, pointing to a similar question, which is basically like, how do I pick? Meaning, how do I pick a teacher, a tradition, a spiritual community, aka a sangha? How do I know? So that's kind of like a how do I start? And how do I know that I'm on the path that's right for me? And all of those questions also I've noticed are coming with this underlayer of fear, might be a strong word, but fear, worry, concern about picking wrong. So not being on the right path for them, not feeling safe about being able to trust a teacher, which of course gets us into all kinds of guru things. And basically like how, once they're on a path, how can they be sure that they're still connected to their own agency in the world that keeps them safe and pointed, you know, in their own true north direction. So when I first started getting the questions, I was kind of like, oh, okay. You know, it's this straightforward question about how do I get started on the path? And then as I started thinking about it, I was like, oh boy, like this actually brings up whole bunches of stuff, you know, and concerns that are really real and valid. And we've certainly seen plenty of examples of, gurus behaving badly or people having confusion around that in a way where they maybe get themselves into a not great situation. So yeah, there's a lot to say from the like very basic, how do I start, to once I'm really engaged in a path, what do I need? What does that look like? And how can I be sure I'm making the right choice?
Yeah, okay. Let's see what comes out of our mouths.
I know, who knows?
Right? There's a lot that could be said. I think I'm going to put in a little cautionary warning. I'm a little manic today, probably because I barely talk to people these last few days.
So let it on out. Maybe, yay! Maybe you'll have a lot to say.
People. I was talking to a client of mine the other day, and she had found this sweet Buddhist center. And for weeks, she was really explaining like the teacher and the things he would say and how they would affect her. And then she didn't speak a lot about the Sangha or the community, but clearly she found it like a really nice, nourishing place to go. And she was really feeling anchored. And I'd known this client for a while. She's had other spiritual teachers. She'd go on retreats, but this is the first time it was like in her city, like she could show up once or twice a week, and she was really enjoying it. And I spoke to her a couple weeks ago, and she was like, you'll never guess what happened with my Buddhist center. And she had done a bunch of research prior, because she's someone who goes in with that level of skepticism that you had described. It's kind of like her antennas are already up, and she's being prepared to have like some culty or guru-y scenario happen because of some things that happened in her past with religion. And she didn't find anything. But this night, for some reason, she got this like hit to do some more research. So she goes and she Googles, and she doesn't find out anything like terrible, other than it's a sect of Buddhism that is at war with the Dalai Lama. And they're doing all sorts of practices that the Dalai Lama doesn't prescribe and doesn't recommend. And that the guru, who is the leader of this aspect of Buddhist tradition, basically only wants you reading things he wrote, et cetera, et cetera. And culty started to feel that way to her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it started to feel that way to her. And so then it was like the whole thing was kind of ruined. It's like it was over. And, we did a little work on how could she still take the teachings that she had felt were valuable, like not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But clearly she felt compelled to move on. So these things happen, right? I mean, I don't think that they've ever happened to me.
I know. I was thinking about that too and answering this. And I was like, okay, so speaking from my own experience, like I don't have experiences, of gurus behaving badly. I don't have experiences of feeling like I've lost my agency to either somebody who I would qualify as like an important therapeutic relationship, like more of spiritual therapist or counseling kind of stuff, or, from a straight up spiritual teacher. Like I haven't felt at risk of being kind of seduced down a weird path. And certainly I do, and I've shared, in love relationships. So you would think that maybe would be a little something on, that comes up for me, but it really hasn't.
No.
Yeah.
But it is in a lot of places. I actually do have a lot of good friends that have been through this in multiple traditions. One of them was in native traditions, where she had some shamans who were on the darker side and she hadn't realized it. I know women who've been molested by male teachers. That has certainly come up. What's the name of that guy? Is it Iyengar tradition? The sweaty yoga, Bikram.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you all don't know who's listening, Bikram has been accused of a cult and multiple levels of sexual abuse within his community. And there's plenty of people who still adore him and think he's something wonderful. So there's like controversy, and this is not that uncommon. I did have once somebody tell me that something I was doing was ayahuasca, and they were lying, and it was a chemical, and this person has quite a huge following.
Yeah.
So these things do happen. I just haven't been seduced down that kind of path. So I guess the first place we start is we acknowledge that there's some reason for the distrust that goes beyond the typical just we're humans, therefore we have fears of intimacy. We have fears of losing agency and control, which is a big one, and especially in the West where we like our independence. But going beyond that, this has happened. And actually, it's happened quite a bit in spiritual communities where teachers have gone awry and there's been controversy. Or quite frankly, Brooke, I mean, I know this is kind of a sidebar, but like when we talk about the Sangha, what I have experienced is doing things like going to yoga communities and finding out that people are really shitty.
Yeah. Yes. Or yeah, on spiritual retreat, I'm always like, which one of these is going to make me, as you know, because I'm usually on retreat with you, which one of these people is going to push every button I have?
Yes. Yes, you find the random narcissist in every retreat.
That's because that karmic seed is like in the field. Who's the shitty narcissist that's going to make me insane?
And turn me into their mother. I don't know. But we find them.
I know.
So I have experience being a part of communities where you think you're in this like more conscious minded, more enlightened on a relative spectrum kind of a community, like a yoga community or a Buddhist sangha, and then found that people treated each other really shitty.
Yeah.
Or were gossiping or were as narcissistic as it got. So I have experienced that. So I don't know. Do you want to start to go down the like cautionary tale of like how to confront fear when you're looking at a path/teacher, or just, where do you begin when you're spiritually curious and you're seeking? Because that's what a lot of people are going through. They're listening to us and they're resonating with it. And they're like, okay, great. But how do I find my mentor or my path that I'm fascinated by?
Right. When we were talking before we started recording, you said it's a lot like love. It's a lot like falling in love. And I think that's true. Like there's when you're dating, when you're looking for love, when it's something you want, there's a wide spectrum of what's out there. There's somebody who's going to make you crazy. There's somebody who's really not good for you. And there are all kinds of partnerships that are going to be like good and resonant and fruitful. So when I was first thinking about this question and I was thinking like, okay, what's the easy way to answer it? And then of course I kept discovering there is no easy way. It's like actually a really complex question. But the first thing I came to is like, we should always keep returning to, is this working for me? Now, that's a completely tricky thing because at first I was like, oh yeah, it's either working or it's not. Like there should be results in your life. Your life should be cleaning up and growing up, and flourishing. However, the process of cleaning up and growing up is coming face to face with all of your shit. So it's like we do on these paths come into very intimate contact with the most challenging aspects of ourselves, the aspects of ourselves that we really don't want to see and that are going to get illuminated at some point. And so there are going to be moments where your teacher pisses you off, some idea that is held in your community that forces you to reconcile with some part of yourself you don't like, pisses you off, so it's actually not like a perfect, right? Because the question is, what does working for you mean? Because working for you doesn't necessarily mean that you're just skipping through daisies all the time and everything's miraculous. Because the truth is, it's all those karmic seeds get pushed up through the soil and now you have to attend. But there is this quality, just like in love relationship, working for you doesn't necessarily mean that you never have a disagreeable moment with your partner, or that there isn't a single thing about them that you dislike or, that annoys you, like the way they don't wash the dishes right after they cook or whatever. But what it does mean is like that those things are held within a larger frame of this person is safe and genuine and honest and loving, and they're here for me, So even though we can bicker about the dishes, the finances, whatever, I know that I'm safe with this person. Now, knowing that you're safe with a person, like anything, is a process. It isn't and shouldn't be instantaneous, and I think for sure an easy red flag of somebody who's not operating from integrity is that they insist that you should hand yourself over to them with complete blind trust. Ever, but particularly in the beginning of a relationship. And I mean with like a teacher or a sangha, So in some ways it helps to just think, because the spiritual world like gets all of these weird ideas attached to it, and we put it aside as something other than the rest of our normal human lives. It's something otherworldly. And so the normal rules don't apply. And yeah, that's not true. Like the normal rules about being good humans
I had a friend who was doing energy work once in a Buddhist sangha, and this friend he's high quality, he's top-notch human being, and he's a good energy worker, and he was doing it within the sangha. Everyone knew, and there was a moment when he wasn't there, and the teacher, the head of the sangha of that community, came out and warned the group about him without him present. And that to me is like a red flag.
Yeah, because it's not integrity. Again, it comes down to integrity. Basic human integrity. If you have an issue with that person, you address it with the person.
Exactly.
If you're going to address it with the group, they know that you're going to address it with the group. That
you're going to address it with the group. Exactly. So, some of what you can look for about what Brooke was just referencing is it's common courtesies. It's like common level of integrity. It's not even this like spiritual, airy kind of level of integrity. It's like just very basic, like, do they gossip? Do they talk badly about their students? How do they handle conflict? How do they handle difficult students?
Yeah, if someone pushes back at them, do they get all kinds of inflamed and have a temper tantrum?
Right. Remember when that narcissist went up at the Dharma Ocean retreat, and Tammy's just sitting there, and he just like railed into like, well, if I'm not getting results, and what does this all mean? And, he kind of just went on this like egoic rant,
Mm-hmm.
and Tammy just sat there like really collected, and she didn't come back at him the way I would want to have, like with an intellectual smackdown or some egoic, kind of talk. And it's like, that's because Tammy has a lot of integrity.
Yeah. And she pulled the plug on where that could have gone, so he has a certain kind of fuel that's pulling for a certain kind of fuel back from her. And instead of doing that, she's able to disrupt the situation by saying like, okay, but why are we even here? What are we really talking about? Yeah.
But it was loving.
Yeah.
And it was integrity filled. So you can watch for that. But I'm thinking, Brooke, what about looking at it like this? Because, okay, I'm digging the falling in love analogy. Why? Because you are not supposed to fall in love with your teacher. So don't do that.
For starters.
Don't do it the way that the word usually means, although you should be quite in love with everything in life if your heart is open. But why is because who your teacher is kind of like who your lover is. Like, you don't exactly write a list and then like decide these are the characteristics. It's more like you get hit with the thunderbolt and you're like, it's you.
Yes. And that's the way it's been with all of my, like, always. I have 3 people who I consider my major teachers: Reggie Ray, Kieran Trace, Judith Blackstone. And all of them are just like, yes, yes, a million times. Yes.
Yeah.
As soon as I hear their voice, it's like, yes.
Yes. It was all of them. And it was John Wellwood, and it was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche through books. So I'm thinking like, okay, but if people are following with my love analogy, if people are thinking like, what's my path? Okay, so is it Hinduism? Is it Kabbalah? Is it Buddhism? I'm curious and I want to go more in depth, but where do I even begin? What's my path? It's kind of like, do I like men? Do I like women?
I know,
it's both. Like, where am I going to start this kind of search? Like, how do I feel into that? And then once they decide, it's like, okay, I kind of like this flavor the most. This is where I'm really finding myself drawn to. It's like, okay, well, now how do I find a teacher within that tradition, or how do I find a practices or a sangha? And then from there, it's like, okay, now that I'm drawn towards this, how do I trust these people? And I know that this is silly and steps, but it's kind of like that just for conversation. So I'm thinking like, if I go back to the beginning, because I've studied Taoism, I've studied Native American traditions, I've studied Buddhism, a little bit about yogic traditions, probably a little less than some of the other ones. And it's like, how did I begin? Well, I don't know about you, but I began by going to bookstores and walking around their like Eastern philosophy sections and their spiritual ones with all the tarot books and all that kind of stuff. And tuning into what I always thought of as like my book fairy was like my book fairy godmother that would like help the right book come my way. And I would just pick up whatever I was interested in, read a couple of paragraphs, and then dive into it. And I did that kind of over and over and over again until I started to find kind of where I was most drawn. And eventually I found John Wellwood through his book. And so I found my first like teacher, my live teacher. But how did you even begin to know like, oh, I'm interested in Buddhism? Like, you know what I mean? How do you even like find a beginning tradition?
For myself and for anyone else I've ever spoken to about this, it has always been like falling in love. It's always been an experience that showed up, like you said, the fairy godmother. We are so indoctrinated to think that we make decisions from our egoic mind, from our thinking mind, and that we can kind of research the best spiritual paths for ourselves and then pick one based on some kind of internal pro and con list. Like, well, this fits with my blah, 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 and not with my. So finding the right path and the right teacher and the right community is a spiritual practice in and of itself. You get led. It's not you. You're not doing anything, and it's going to show up. So it could be your book fairy, or it could just be your resource fairy. Vanessa and I are people, first of all. So like we have a lot to say. Sometimes depends on the day. But anyway, we're also talking about a lot of teachers who we're really passionate about. So like there's all those names sprinkled right there. And then there are other resources. There's Sounds True, which is this whole giant resource of spiritual teachers in the world. There's Buddha at the Gas Pump, which is a podcast talking to people. There's On Being with Krista Tippett. So there's so many people out there doing this work. And all you have to do is just like, what is the thing that winks at you? And it's not subtle, just like, when you have an amazing first date and you're like, I want to see that guy again. That was awesome. Like we had great conversation. We laughed, like real laughing. It feels like that, and I remember when I first listened to it, you introduced me, you pestered me for a while. Actually, you were like, Brooke, would you listen to Reggie Ray, Dharma Ocean? Dharma Ocean sounded so corny to me, the words, that I was like, come on. And so I finally listened to it one day. So it was like perfect day, perfect timing. I put it on. I wasn't expecting anything except I was thinking of it as an intellectual exercise for my podcast. I was like, oh, okay, for Liberated Body, I'll just listen to it a bit. It was, I think, 30 seconds into listening to Reggie talk for the very first time in a recording that I was literally weeping in my living room. And I was like, this. I wasn't looking for a teacher. I didn't give a shit about being on a spiritual path or not. But it was like, yes, this. And it's been like that with all of the teachers who I consider my major teachers. So it is like falling in love,
I'm laughing because I know how like very emotive that experience is for you because I've witnessed it.
I want to dedicate my whole life to this, Vanessa. And you're like, okay.
I have. When I found John Wellwood, so, we're in our 40s, right? So that was like, we weren't even really using the internet that much when I found John Wellwood. So it's like old school style. Like I had to sit and read a book.
Yeah.
Right? And I read his book, Toward a Psychology of Awakening. And it was like this.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. Like, how we've talked about delicious yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like delicious yes. There are a lot of nuances to it that I'm still working with. But one, like, is it a hell yes or not is so clear because one person asks you to do a business project and you're like, on my pro and con list, this is interesting. And then another person asks and you're like, yes.
Right. Oh, totally.
Like, no.
This thing,
question.
Yes. It doesn't feel like effort. It's just like wind at my back.
Yes. Just like all of you know, perhaps a moment when you went on a date and you're coming up with your pros, but this is a very nice person. You're trying to talk yourself into it.
Right.
Versus you go on a date and it's like, oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
You, mine, now.
Yeah.
Right?
Instead of like, well, on paper, we both like hiking and we've both worked in the arts, but you're not feeling it.
You feel, no. So you'll know when it's a yes. That's the first thing to kind of think of. I read Toward a Psychology of Awakening. It was a yes. I immediately went to find when John was teaching. And of course it was soon because that's the beauty of synchronicity because he was meant to be my teacher and I went. I remember Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche has always been my teacher. He has never been alive at the same time as me. I think he died right around when I was born, but from books, always. I found Reggie by listening to Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche podcasts and searching, and I heard Reggie's voice, and it's same thing as Brooke. I was like, him, mine, must.
Yes.
Right? And I think I listened to Reggie for about a year before I was like, Brooke, should we actually go on this retreat and like make it a thing? And then I remember you and I in the car driving to Dharma Ocean, listening to Kieran, because I have pulled up her Buddha at the Gas Pump podcast. And I was like, okay, I was actually looking for a little validation on that one because I was like, I'm really resonating with this one. But if any of you have heard Kieran, she's a little more far to the left than a typical Buddhist teacher, right? Buddhism sounds so like intellectual. You get to feel airy-fairy for lack of a better way. But Kieran was a little to the left. So I was like, I really like her. And I put her on for Brooke. And Brooke was like 1,000 times yes.
Yes. Exactly.
And that same retreat, I had heard, actually, before Brooke even heard Judith Blackstone and before I even heard of her, we heard her name and we both were like, it's her.
Yeah, I know. That's right. With Judith, it was just her name. That's so funny.
And then I listened to her on Buddha at the Gas Pump. So, okay, a couple of things you can extract from this. One, when you find the right inroad, it comes from something much larger than you. And it feels like a slam in the back, like, hell yes, go to this. I want to go to there. And it's really, really clear. The other thing you can get is Buddha at the Gas Pump is a great resource. I do with Buddha at the Gas Pump. I mean, now I've listened to too many. But I did with it what I used to do with books. Like I just scroll through it until my inner voice was like, this one.
Yeah.
I'm so curious. And then I would listen. It's almost like I used to say sometimes to clients who are creatives, who are stuck, that like you have to seduce the muse. Well, I feel that way about like teachers. Like right before I found Reggie and Kieran and Judith, like what are the odds we found 3 teachers in a year?
I know.
Statistically speaking, it makes no sense. But of course, from the higher rhythm, it's perfect. Right before that, I actually said, hey, life, like I'd really like another teacher, because it had been really years since John Wellwood and years since someone I had felt like a connection with. And I was like, I'm really ready. Almost like when you say like, hey, life, I'm ready to fall in love, like very sincerely. And boom, 3 of them happened in a year and they just came. So that's a little bit about, I guess, how we began. Right? Is there more to say about how we began?
No, it makes me like what you were just saying about when you were really ready. It makes me want to say a little bit about why. Like, why have a teacher? Why have a sangha? Why have a tradition? Because it's easy for us, especially in these like heady self-help days, to just like keep flipping through self-help books or, going to a evening hangout, with all different kinds of people or whatever, all of which are totally fine. But, for me, when I found Reggie, I didn't have anything in my head like I'm looking to have a spiritual practice. I'm looking for a teacher. None of that was even remotely in my mind. But what was very clear to me in my life is that I was making a journey. I was in the process of a transformation, which I had gotten quite a lot of help and success with. But I still felt stuck. And I felt like there was something bigger and different than like therapy. I knew that there was something deeper. And so when I found him, it was for that reason. And then the process for me on the path, as I've become really dedicated to it, is that, I really don't think you can make the journey for most without something. You don't have to have a guru who you put on a pedestal. Pedestals are all kinds of problems. That's why we have no shortage of examples of gurus behaving badly, but at the very least, some kind of community, a sangha who is engaged in the same process you are, which again, to like use Reggie Ray's definition of what do we mean by spiritual path in the first place, it's the being deeply engaged in the process of giving birth to your true self, so this is not a small thing. And to do it in a vacuum is very hard. And I don't know why this just popped into my head, but it's kind of like, it would be kind of like trying to get sober in a vacuum. Like, I'm just going to not talk to anyone about it and just not drink. It's like, we know from experience if in humanity, like, people need support when they're making a big journey or a big alchemical transformation or transition in their lives. So I do think that it's very important to get into the stream if you know you want to be in the stream and it's calling to you. And then once you're in the stream, some of those issues about like, how do I not wind up in a bad situation? Considering that teachers are going to push back on you sometimes and make you see parts of yourself that you don't want to see. I think about it a lot the way I think about medical care. Like, if I had a mole on my leg and I went to go see the first doctor I went to go see, he said, I don't like the looks of that. I think we should amputate. I wouldn't schedule surgery. Like, I would get multiple second opinions. And I think that, for me, the guru-less path has been really important. Like, I could be in Dharma Ocean, right? And be going through all of their steps and levels and classes and be like, I am progressing on this path that they have laid out towards being a teacher in the Dharma Ocean lineage. But it doesn't resonate for me. It feels like I'm jumping through intellectual hoops that I don't need to jump through when my process is alive in me. And it's doing things like taking me over to Kieran Trace and Judith Blackstone. And, today I need to listen to Adyashanti. Tomorrow I need to watch Byron Katie do the work with people. Who knows? So I'm a big fan actually of cross-pollination and of letting this process be alive in yourself. And then I know you also have goodies to say about how there are downsides to that too, because there are. It can get a little thin.
Yeah, you said a lot that I wanted to respond to. So let's lay out like this idea. At least in Buddhism, they have an idea. They talk about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the noble sangha, and those are like three aspects of your path. And the Buddha is your teacher, your guru. Maybe it's a godhead if you're in a Christian tradition or a Jewish tradition, something like that, Muslim tradition. And then you have the Dharma, which is the teachings and practices, the traditions associated. And then you have the Sangha, which is your community, the people you're on the journey with. And Buddha had recommended that you have all three of those. So I'm thinking back, and this is really, you see this everywhere, right? It's like Catholics go to church, Muslims pray together, right? Like, you see that people are in community. You see that there's always a figurehead and or a God, both. So when I had told the story, I think in Meet Vanessa, or maybe it was in one of the meditation episodes, I don't know. But it was like when I first found John Wellwood, I did what I typically do. I barely meditated to warm up for it. I went on a meditation retreat, having almost never meditated more than 10 minutes and in a very lighthearted, I do energy work kind of way. And then I went on like a 6 to 8 hour meditation a day mindfulness retreat, and it was torturous. But I do that. I love to just dive in, and I drown or I don't, and that's super fun for me. And so I did that. And I came back and I was meditating 45 minutes a day, doing the Shambhala style meditation, and I felt like I was falling apart, which is something that has been noted in some of the more recent research around mindfulness. Like, could it be dangerous? I think we posted an article about that on Facebook. Well, I do think that there's something that can arise when you're sitting quietly with yourself and all of your unpackaged wounds for 45 minutes a day. But I wasn't in relationship with John Wellwood at that point, not until I moved to California. So I didn't have him to ask, and I didn't have a community of people to go to. So I felt like I was falling apart. But was that good or bad? I had no context, and I had no one to support me. This is why it's very helpful having something or someone to ground in, either in a tradition, like I can read a book and I can gain understanding on it, or in a teacher or in a community of people I can go to start to ground my experience and get some context. When is this useful? When isn't this useful? So that's like at a very basic level why I think that's good. Now, what you were referring to, Brooke, when you said that the downsides that I was going to reference is, I've dabbled most of my life. And I think about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche had taught something about like, okay, spiritual shopping, like go spiritual shopping, do all of that, dabble, learn, listen to podcasts, like do everything Brooke and I are recommending, do that for a year or so. And he said, and then pick a tradition. And he said, because if you don't, and Chogyam was actually pretty open. It wasn't that he was like a Buddhist dogmatic person. It was just pick a tradition, whatever yours is, and then go deep. Because he said, otherwise the risk is you'll build a lot of shallow holes and you'll never get to the depths. Now, Brooke has some disagreement on that concept based on what she had shared prior, at least. But here's what I get about it. As a dabbler, as someone who still dabbles, because I have 3 different teachers and they're not all in the same tradition, is this. We have a way of hiding, period. We have a way of using our spiritual superego. That's why if you all have ever listened to J.P. Sears, and if not, stop listening to this and go listen to him immediately. Like his whole work is built off of the spiritual superego, right? Like we have all of these comfy places that our ego will hide and delude us. And frankly, you can't see what you can't see, period. You just can't see. You can't see how you're operating all of the time because you're running the game, right? You're running the delusion. So you're caught in the mire of it. So what I think choosing a path, be it a teacher, a tradition, a sangha, hopefully all, because they often come interwoven. But when you find a path, is there's less wiggle room for your ego to co-opt just what works from it and to hide from what is going to push it into its uncomfortable zone and to push it into growth. So right now we have these 3 different teachers that we spoke about, but Kieran will not let me wiggle, for fuck's sake, try as I might. Right. Nor would Reggie if I was in front of him. Nor would Reggie. And nor would Judith. She's just way more chill about it.
She's so freaking sweet. I know.
Bless her in the way that she confronts you. So I don't think that even though we're kind of like drawing from our alive wells, I think we're farther into a process so we can pull from different traditions. And B, we have not picked any easy ways to delude ourselves.
No. And, all of the, so that's what I would disagree about and have disagreed about with you is like, I've seen that, right? I've seen it with people where they do just dig tons of tiny little shallow holes. And it's like, I'm into bliss, I'm into bliss consciousness. And so they'll just like go do a little night here and bliss out. And then I'll go over to these people over here. And then I'm going to go on this week-long trip with this energy healer. It's all about bliss consciousness. And it's just bliss, bliss, bliss. And what they really need to do is confront the fact that they, are really shitty to everyone they have a relationship with in their life, or whatever. So I've seen that for sure, ideally, so for us, for me, like I have a variety of teachers and a variety of teachings that I draw on, but none of them allow wiggle room. Like I'm never going to spend a week with Judith Blackstone and have her just be like, yeah, whatever makes you feel good, Brooke. Like she's not ever going to encourage spiritual bypassing. And I think that it just comes down to the chops of teachers. Reggie would never encourage spiritual bypassing. Kieran certainly doesn't let anyone get away with spiritual bypassing. So that's really the zhuzh is draw from a wide variety of teachers, but none of whom are just ultra spiritual in the world of JP Sears, none of whom are just spiritual ego making and just making it all, mystical and you're different from everyone and more special and whatever feels good. I remember at one point in our first week of training with Judith, she was talking about how, her work is deep, deep profound embodiment. And she was saying that she had noticed so many people who, she comes out of a Zen tradition, right? And people who have been lifelong meditators, they just keep opening along the lines that they're comfortable opening. So if somebody's got a lot of up, head, eyes, up and out energy, they're just going to keep going up and out because it's the groove that has the most wear in it. So you need to make sure you're working with people who are high integrity in the sense that they keep bringing you back to balance. Like if you're somebody who likes to go up and out, they're going to bring you down and in, you know? So I think as opposed to thinking of it in the way that I think a lot of people do, just because there's this spiritual misconception that you need to like pick a perfect guru and just give your life to them forever, you know, whatever they say. And you don't push back on them. You don't wonder where the path is taking you. You just hand yourself over on a silver platter. I think that that's a weird idea that has gotten baked into the word spiritual. And I don't think that there's truth to that.
Well, I think certainly people would hotly debate you on that, actually, because sometimes like that is kind of the concept of gurus, like in the idea being that they can see what you can't see, right? Especially if you had an enlightened guru, right? The idea is they can see everything. So you have to surrender to them, right? That's like the guru practice. In yoga, they have a whole lineage that's like guru yoga, which is like how to be in service of this. Ram Dass is actually that. Ram Dass completely just surrendered to his guru. That's how he did it. So now, I don't really get behind that energy either, but there are people who would say that that is great. I don't think I trust humans enough to think that's a great idea. I don't know, but I did want to bring together something you were saying. So you have Judith, Kieran, Reggie. We have 3 different teachers, just what we're saying. However, there is a common theme, which is embodied meditation and embodiment.
It's all down and in.
It's all down and in. So in a way, it's like we're still digging one deep hole.
Yeah.
We just found these different voices to support us. And they actually support us in different ways.
Yep.
Really. Right. So, you know, that's something interesting to consider. It's like Reggie just doesn't work one-on-one with people the way Kieran does. Neither does Judith.
Yep.
And they all offer like this different nuance. So anyway, that's part of it. That's part of the digging deep holes. Then I'm thinking about safety. And I was thinking about how, okay, so all of the people we've chosen will kind of hold your feet to the fire. And that's what you want in a teacher. It's what you want actually in a spiritual sangha too. But they never do it by breaking me.
Yeah.
There is not a hurt feeling. And a really evolved teacher, they give different medicine to different people. It's like they can feel where you're at and they meet you there and they just take you a little beyond. So it shouldn't feel painful. You shouldn't feel scorned. You shouldn't feel judged. You shouldn't feel like someone's trying to break you down. That was one of the things that Bikram was doing with people, is he breaks you down. He makes you lose sleep so you could become superhuman, but he's like, and he makes you watch videos of him. I mean, it's like, it's an actual, he would come from the level of like break you down to build you up. But most teachers that I think you and I are resonant with, Brooke, I think I can speak for you on this. They just know we're all one and we're already God. There's no sense of like, I have to break down your ego. It's more like, let's see where the growing edge is. Let's see where the limitation is. And let's see if that can be released. And let's see if that can be embodied. It's not a tear down process. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was thinking in terms of safety, and I don't know if this comes with our age. So I don't know if like you would feel the same, but somewhere along the line, I developed a healthy notion of all teachers are only human.
Yeah. So important to keep that front of mind. There is no such thing, even someone who's fully enlightened, as like a special other person who doesn't have to participate in the normal rules of integrity human beings.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, you know, there are people who I haven't met, like they talk about Ramana Maharshi this way, or Ram Dass's teacher Maharaji, as like really saintly. like enlightened and saintly as shit, and everyone kind of has the same impression of them. But those are very few and far between. Moreover, if you guys are all looking for a teacher, the odds are you're not going to stumble upon the saintly enlightened being. The odds are you're going to stumble upon people with a lot of wisdom and a lot to share who are human. And maybe they've evolved past a lot of limitations, but they still have lenses that are operating. They still have preferences and habits. And so that means that you treat them as humans who have a ton to offer you, who you can give a lot of reference to, but not gods.
Yeah. And you and I, like, for those who are listening and they hear us saying Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and they know what that means, they know who he is. Yeah, it's just worth touching in. If we're talking about this, we might as well talk about it. So you've always known that he is your teacher, in a very direct way. And I am a part of a lineage that comes from him, Dharma Ocean, Reggie Ray. I don't know that if he were still living, that I would be able to call him my teacher. Here is somebody who was very challenging. He did sleep with his students a lot. He did things that, from this distance in the future compared to where he used to be, and not having a relationship with him, I'm like, God, I couldn't be cool with that. And yet the people who I know who did have relationships with him, Reggie Ray, Pema Chodron, they talk about him as profoundly loving, and the way he loved you is that he wanted your awakening for you more than anything else, so that was like the most profound love. So I don't have a personal experience, but, it's just worth mentioning. I don't know, like what my lived experience would be if this teacher were still alive. I don't know that I could hang with him as my teacher. So,
well, you can't know because you can't experience him, right? It's like, I think I told you once when I was on a retreat with John Wellwood and he was doing some work with a client because John's a psychologist and a Buddhist, and he was doing work in front of the group. And he said something to the woman that was very profound in my opinion, but he kind of called her out on something like, you're not just doing that for them. You were doing it for yourself. It was like something in that genre of comment. And afterwards he got torn to shreds by the group. Like, that was so mean. You were so unempathetic to her. Now, that's not at all how I perceived it first. Second, it is not how the client perceived it. She found it profoundly loving because it was right on. It gave her an awakening to something within herself. 3, what John explained was that in Buddhism, there's 2 different ways you look at compassion. So the first is this typical like holding, like a container, like, come and I will give you space to exist. And actually, strangely enough, that's the masculine side of compassion in Buddhism. And then the other side, the feminine side, it's called the sword of prajna. Prajna means wisdom. So it's the compassion of cutting through people's delusions.
Yep.
And that is, to me, profoundly compassionate because in my experience, and granted, I'm just naturally built for spaciousness, but in my experience, that's easier because there's not a lot of risk I'm going to hurt your feelings. There is risk. I'll fall into idiot compassion and I'll enable you, but there's not a lot of risk I'll get into conflict with you. But if I want to call you out on your shit and cut through some of your delusions, there is some risk. You can take it hard. You can take it the wrong way. You can get upset. I mean, it's happened. It happens to me, where people can upset me like that. So I always found that to be the most profoundly loving thing.
Yeah.
Now that's where it gets tricky when we're trying to ascertain. It's like being in a relationship, and is this person abusive, or are they just telling me something honestly? Are they communicating in a way that is healthy, or are they communicating in a way that's inflammatory? And unless you've known a good relationship, how do you know if you're in one? Right? So, it is a little dodgy, but for the most part, when I've had someone say something to me that's a little harsh, it's very quick before I'm like, aw, that was really true, though. That was for my own. Yeah.
There's a relief that comes on the heels of what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe the last thing we could say about it is that if something feels abusive to you in the sense that something feels culty, or it feels like a teacher's being mean, or someone's trying to break down your ego structures in a way that feels unsafe, maybe just that's not your teacher for now. Maybe they're not good or bad. Maybe it's just not for you.
Yeah, we get to say no thank you to things.
Yeah, no thank you right now.
Yeah.
There's different medicine for different people at different times. And so you may listen to, let's say, Kieran and be like, oh God, no thank you. How did Brooke and Vanessa love her so much? And it's like, well, maybe she's not for you right now. Maybe never. But that's just how that is. And you get to kind of like follow your impulse without over-analyzing it, because this doesn't have to be about making a tradition or a teacher right or wrong, good or bad. It really just has to be about like, where is your next growing edge? Where is there room for you to have a little more freedom and a little more freedom? And then following into that and then seeing what happens and then keep going. Does it feel like a yes? Does it feel like a yes?
Yeah.
Feel like a yes? And then follow into that. Even these teachers, if at some point they feel like a no, then I will thank them for their help and I will devote my reverence to them and I'll walk the other direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the path is doing itself. We don't solve it as a problem from the level of the mind. We just let it unfold. And we do that through whatever yes comes along, And then there's always like build yourself a wide web of support in your life to check in with. So everything doesn't rest on some pedestalized guru.
I am thinking that people just are not having these kinds of conversations enough.
Mm-hmm.
I get that sense just even from the way people have sent us notes and everything about the podcast, that it's like refreshing just to be able to have these conversations about things people are thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very helpful to have a spiritual friend, which, by the way, guru in Buddhism is spiritual friend. So if anyone feels like they're being much higher than you probably have a problem.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know. We'll toy around with how we can assist in that so that we can all be in conversation more, because I think that's how you can also start to decipher, is this just my ego reacting to a teacher or to a teaching, or is this really genuine for me? Because I don't know, for me, I can spot my bullshit way more when I'm saying it out loud.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, of course, you have these kind others who help you out. So I don't know. Do you think, like, did we do justice to this?
We did something to this. So that's a start.
you all can let us know. Did we do anything to answer this topic?
We'll have more to say over time. It'll be good. We'll always revisit.
And just come with the questions, I guess. Because maybe you have even more than when you first started.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website and scroll down, you'll see each episode's separate post, and the resources are right in there. You can also come chat with us on the social media channel of your choice. Instagram and Facebook are where we hang out, and we get a lot of engagement, so join the conversation. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, the most wonderful thing you can do for us right now is write a review for us on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. We also have a new subscribe form on the website, which is blissandgrit.com, and you can go there and sign up if you want to stay in touch with all the goodies we have coming for the community. We're loving getting your questions and hearing from you on social media. And if technology is not your thing, but you're enjoying the show, well, we'd love it if you just tell your friends you think it might resonate with. Huge gratitude to those of you who have already written reviews. I can't believe we're up to episode 25 and we already have 35 reviews. It feels so good. And here's one I want to read from Elise Gibb. Bliss and Grit is so good. Brooke and Vanessa tackle the big questions in a down-to-earth, relatable, and engaging manner. Their conversations include insights from their years of study, their own spiritual journeys, and their various areas of expertise, and are smart, yes, accessible. Bliss and Grit leaves me with ideas to play with in my own life and makes me think, right, exactly, or I never thought of it like that. Best of all, this is like listening in on a conversation between two of your best girlfriends, so it's fun. These are two smart, talented women putting their voices out there in a brave and open way for the benefit of all of us listeners. I love that review, and I always love it when people feel like they're just part of our conversation, like we're all sitting around and having coffee. It means so much to us. So thank you so much for that. Elise, thank you to all of you who've given us reviews, and thank you to all of you for just listening and showing up and engaging. We'll be back next week.